Some of the most troubling passages in the whole of the New Testament are found in this passage that we read this morning from Mark. Preachers are warned to avoid them by those who care for them. This is especially problematic for those who read the Bible literally. Ask 100 people to identify their favorite biblical passages, and you probably won't get 1 in 100 who identifies these passages from Mark. If your hand is causing you to stumble, cut it off. If your foot's causing you to stumble, cut it off. If your eye is causing you to stumble, pluck it out. What happened? Where is my meek and mild Jesus, who can count every hair on my head? Did he turn into a religious sadist somehow? Will he be asking me to flog myself next? Jesus, the non-violent lover of life and wholeness and health, is he really talking about literal amputation? If not that, then what is he trying to tell us? What's he trying to advise us to do? Perhaps the verses are to be read metaphorically instead of literally. Maybe Jesus is inviting us to consider what in our personal lives and in our church life is causing us to stumble on the way to the kingdom, causing us to disrespect some persons, causing us to refuse to love others as we are supposed to love ourselves, to refuse to welcome the immigrant and the outsider, to refuse to discard prejudices and biases. Take a minute now and search around in the attic of your brain and see if you can locate any old and ugly resentments, a bias that you may have against another person or a group of persons, a hatred of the outsider, a fear of the different. You may feel hostility to someone. This person did something to hurt you, maybe yesterday or 10 years ago. See if you can locate an old, ugly resentment against that person. A word was spoken, an action was done, or maybe something wasn't done that should have been done. Or perhaps there's a hostility you feel toward someone just because of who that person is. Resentment towards that person and those like him or her can begin to grow in ourselves and in our communities. We make up lies that defame them and encourage others to strike out in anger against them. It almost doesn't matter if you're aware of that resentment or not. It still grows. And eventually, if we don't pluck it out, amputate it, it begins to take over the whole body. Perhaps this is what Jesus is talking about when he talks about amputation, when he tells us to pluck out eyes and cut off hands and feet. Maybe what he means is that our resentments and hatreds and prejudices and fears of the other need to be removed from our individual lives and from the life of the church and the communities in which we live. But that's a lot easier said than done, isn't it? If you've ever tried to get rid of a long-held resentment or a prejudice, you know it's not easy. Resentment can seem so much a part of who we are that its disappearance may seem like a loss, an amputation. Prejudice can contribute to our identity of who we are, who we think we are, who other people see us as. It seems an unremovable part of who we are sometimes. I'm a white male from the Deep South. I'm descendants of people who rebelled against the Union. One of my great relatives was Leonidas Polk, who was an Episcopal bishop leading up to the Civil War and became a Confederate general. They called him the Fighting Bishop. And even after the Civil War, there were other people who continued to mistreat and kill neighbors for no other reason than that their skin was maybe a little darker than the skin of most people. That prejudice became part of my identity. It was part of who I was. And it took several years for me to excise that ignorance from my life. In the period of silence that comes after the conclusion of this sermon, I'd like to imagine that resentment or that bias in you, what you may not even be aware is there sometimes, that has haunted you since your youth, like racism haunted me, and try to tear that resentment from its place and lose it. In doctors' offices, they have a little box they call it for biohazard items, and you put stuff in the box, That's what I think about, that sort of imagery, and then put these resentments and biases and hatreds in a spiritual biohazard box. It's an odd offering you're making, but God understands it, accepts it, and continues to accept you, even though you may have some biases and hatreds that have lingered for a long time. That's human, those are the things that we deal with as human beings. We don't have to deal with them alone. We can go to God, we can go to Christ, and we are assured of getting some help with that. And if you're helped to identify those resentments, you will also be helped to cut those out of your life. And what that amputation leaves is not so much a gaping wound, but a place that will grow anew into something new and better and with more vitality and godliness.